morning, good evening to everybody, wherever you are in the world. So today we will continue our reading of Sophie's World. This is the fourth mm, reading of the book, basically. So last time we were reading about. Okay, before we start, let me quickly see who is in the panel. Lawyer Garu is there. Namaste, Lawyer Garu. Sikshadin Garu has also
Hello, sir.
joined.
Namaste.
Lawyer
Hi,
Garu is in
Shiksha.
the going
Hello,
with
sir. Good evening,
the
sir.
Yeah,
good
I'll be back
evening.
home in 10 minutes. Second.
No, going with the Greek theme of Greece. We'll say Lawyer Garu is in the agora, the market, shopping basically, right? So, so it's not quite Athens, but close enough. So with that said, we'll jump straight into the reading. Sikshadrin Garu, if you want to start, you can start. Otherwise, I can start, and then we can. I'll hand it off to
Yeah,
you whenever you're ready.
yeah, I'll start, sir. Sir,
Okay, perfect.
I want the page number, sir, if you
Yes.
kindly.
So no problem. There's no rush. Let's take our time. Page number 36, and the heading of the text that we are going to read, or the portion that we are going to read, is called "The Philosophy of Athens." Basically,
Right,
okay.
sir.
Yeah. So before you start, just a quick background on where we left off last time. Um, Sophie was wondering who the, in quotes, the messenger was, or the person was, if at all it was a person that was delivering these letters with the holes and the wetness and whatever it is. And then she realized it was a very large Labrador dog, basically. Obviously, very disappointed. At the same time, she was also sort of wondering why she could not actually deduce that from the evidence that was there. I felt that the author was also, uh, yeah, SK Garu is in the comment. Namaste, SK Garu. So she was not able to deduce it from the evidence. So the thing is, if your mind is somewhere in dreams and you are imagining all kinds of fantastic things, you tend to ignore the evidence that is in front of you, basically. Right? The evidence always screams about one thing, one possibility. But then our minds, because of our conditioning or whatever it is, they go into all kinds of directions. And we tend to superimpose those possibilities on the evidence and try to come up with fantastic stories a lot of times. The likelihood that a fantastic story is true is nearly close to zero. However, if you're able to really stay in the present moment and then think about what's out there, that what the evidence is screaming at you, then you'll most likely be able to recreate what the reality is. So I think the author very subtly hinted at that as well. But Sophie is a little girl, right? As are most people when it comes to the world of philosophy. So you tend to make mistakes, right? Because your mind is not quite trained enough to deductive reasoning, as they say. So with that introduction, let's go into the reading, sir. Sikshadin Garu, over to you. SK Garu, welcome to the panel.
Hello, Andy.
Hello.
Okay. Yes, sir. Okay, guys, I'll go ahead with the chapter of the philosophy of Athens. Dear Sophie, when you read this, you may already have met Hermes. In case you haven't, I'll add that he's a dog. But don't worry, he's a very good tempered and moreover a good deal more intelligent than a lot of people. In any event, he never tries to give the impression of being cleverer than he is. You may also note that his name is not without significance. In Greek mythology, Hermes was the messenger of the gods. He was also the god of seafarers. But we shall not bother about that, at least not for the moment. It is more important that Hermes also gave his name to the word hermetic, which means hidden or inaccessible, not inappropriate for the way Hermes takes care to keep the two of us hidden from each other. So, the messenger has herewith been introduced. Naturally, he answers to his name and is altogether very well behaved. But to return to philosophy, we have already completed the first part of the course. I refer to the natural philosophers and their decisive break with the mythological world picture. Now we are going to meet the three great classical philosophers, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Each in his own way, these philosophers influenced the whole of European civilization. The natural philosophers are also called the pre-Socratics because they lived before Socrates. Although Democritus died some years after Socrates, all his ideas belong to pre-Socratic natural philosophy. Socrates represents a new era, geographically as well as temporally. He was the first of the great philosophers to be born in Athens, and both he and his two successors lived and worked there. You may recall that Anaxagoras Anaxagoras also lived in Athens for a while, but was hounded out because he said that his head, the sun, was a red hot stone. Socrates fared no better. From the time of Socrates, Athens was the center of Greek culture. It is also important to note the change of character in the philosophical project itself as it progresses from natural philosophy to Socrates. But before we meet Socrates, let us hear a little about the so-called sophists who dominated the Athenian scene at the time of Socrates. Curtain up, Sophie. The history of ideas is like a drama in many acts. Man at the center. After about 450 BC, Athens was the cultural center of the Greek world. From this time on, philosophy took a new direction. The natural philosophers had been mainly concerned with the nature of the physical world. This gives them a central position in the history of science. In Athens, interest was now focused on the individual and the individual's place in society. Gradually, a democracy evolved with popular assemblies and courts of law. In order for democracy to work, people had to be educated enough to take part in the democratic process. We have seen in our own time how a young democracy needs popular enlightenment. For the Athenians, it was first and foremost essential to master the art of rhetoric, which means saying things in a convincing manner. A group of itinerant teachers and philosophers from the Greek colonies flocked to Athens. They called themselves sophists. The word sophist means a wise and informed person. In Athens, the sophists made a living out of teaching the citizens for money. The sophists had one characteristic in common with the natural philosophers. They were critical of the traditional mythology, but at the same time, the sophists rejected what they regarded as fruitless philosophical speculation. Their opinion was that although answers to philosophical questions may exist, man cannot know the truth about the riddles of nature and of the universe. In philosophy, a view like this is called skepticism. But even if we cannot know the answers to all of nature's riddles, we know that people have to learn to live together. The sophists chose to concern themselves with man and his place in society. Man is the measure of all things, quote unquote, said the sophist to Protagoras. By that he meant that the question of whether a thing is right or wrong, good or bad, must always be considered in relation to a person's needs. On being asked whether he believed in the Greek gods, he answered, the quote unquote, the question is complex and life is short. A person who is unable to say categorically whether or not the gods or God exists is called an agnostic. The sophists were, as a rule, men who had traveled widely and seen different forms of government. Both conventions and local laws in the city-states could vary widely. This led the sophists to raise the question of what was natural and what was socially induced. By doing this, they paved the way for social criticism in the city-state of Athens. They could, for example, point out that the use of an expression like natural modesty is not always defensible, for it is natural to be modest. It must be something you are born with, something innate. But is it really innate, Sophie, or is it socially induced? To someone who has traveled the world, the answer should be simple. It is not natural or innate to be afraid to show yourself naked. Modesty, or the lack of it, is first and foremost a matter of social convention. As you can imagine, the wandering sophists created bitter wrangling in Athens by pointing out that there were no absolute norms for what was right or wrong. Socrates, on the other hand, tried to show that some such norms are in fact absolute and universally valid. Who was Socrates? Socrates is possibly the most enigmatic figure in the
Sir, hang on,
in
sir, hang on. So we need to
Yes, sir.
introduce this chapter properly. So that ended
Right,
that
sir.
chapter about Sophis and Athens and how they brought out certain questions in terms of what is natural versus. So basically, they were breaking some existing norms, right? And for the simple reason that they had gained knowledge through travel and exposure to various kinds of governance models as well as how various societies organize themselves. Okay. Now, they were able to pose those questions because they had that background, right? It's important to realize that through that kind of experience, you are going to gain knowledge because even in the Indian philosophical context, one of the key things that the so-called princely people who were growing up in the kingdom, in the king's palace, for example, or the future heirs of a kingdom, were given a mandate after they finished their formal education to go and travel the kingdom that they are going to govern, basically, right? The point is very simple because the ruler needs to get exposure, or the governor or the governance people who govern need to have a broader perspective. With that said, just because you read a couple of books written by people who travel, you're not going to gain that knowledge. In this day and age, it seems like there is a group of people, right, who we call whatever terms they describe themselves by, self-appointed people who have this knowledge because they subscribe to somebody else's philosophy, basically, right? and that needs to be brought into picture very clearly. So that is that chapter. Now we are getting into the Socrates part, right? So the name of the chapter is Who was Socrates? Please go ahead, sir. Sikshadendra.
Sir, I would like to give a term to those so-called people who claim to be intellectuals, sir.
Fine, go ahead.
Armchair intellectuals.
Yeah, well, whether you call it armchair or whatever it is, right? There is a certain,
Yes,
even in this short introduction to the people who were questioning the existing norms, the author is very
yeah,
careful about describing what their background is, basically, right? People of
right, sir.
ancient Greece did not just give these people the carte blanche to go and ask any question or any um, open-ended, what do you call, the ability to open-endedly question anything and everything. Point number one. Point number two, very clearly they said if you have to participate in the democratic process, you have to be, you have to have a certain kind of background, basically. Okay. Unfortunately, those rules originally that govern democracy have been modified, changed, have long gone out of the window. For better, worse, bad, good, it's a matter of perspective, basically. But it doesn't exist today. It's one vote per person, right? It doesn't matter who you are, what your background is. You get to participate in the democratic process, right? So,
It's
yeah. So let's get to Socrates.
right, sir. So, who was Socrates? Socrates is possibly the most enigmatic figure in the entire history of philosophy. He never wrote a single line, yet he is one of the philosophers who has had the greatest influence on European thought, not at least because of the dramatic manner of his death. We know he was born in Athens, and that he spent most of his life in the city squares and marketplaces talking with people he met there. The trees inside the countryside can teach me nothing, he said. He could also stand lost in thought for hours on end. Even during his lifetime, he was considered somewhat enigmatic, and fairly soon after his death, he was held to be the founder of any number of different philosophical schools of thought. The very fact that he was so enigmatic and ambiguous made it possible for widely differing schools of thought to claim him as their own. We know for a certainty that he was extremely ugly. He was pot-bellied and had bulging eyes and a snub nose. But inside, he was said to be perfectly delightful. It was also said of him that you can seek him in the present, you can seek him in the past, but you will never find his equal. Nevertheless, he was sentenced to death for his philosophical activities. The life of Socrates is mainly known to us through the writings of Plato, who was one of his pupils and who became one of the greatest philosophers of all time. Plato wrote a number of dialogues or dramatized discussions on philosophy, in which he uses in which he uses Socrates as his principal character and mouthpiece. Since Plato is putting his own philosophy in Socrates' mouth, we cannot be sure that the words he speaks in the dialogues were ever actually uttered by him. So, it is no easy matter to distinguish between the teachings of Socrates and the philosophy of Plato. Exactly the same problem applies to many other historical persons who left no written accounts. The classic example of course, is Jesus. We cannot be certain that the historical Jesus actually spoke the words Matthew or Luke ascribed to him. Similarly, what the historical Socrates actually said will always be shrouded in mystery. But who Socrates really was is relatively unimportant. It is Plato's portrait of Socrates that has inspired thinkers in the Western world for nearly 2500 years. The art of discourse.
Yeah, so that ended the
Who
initial
was
introduction to
Socrates?
Socrates. Yeah, exactly. So the next chapter now is the art of the discourse, and I think this is probably one of the most important pieces to keep in mind, because in this day and age, even now, the overall discourse globally is more or less a Western discourse, right? So if you're able to understand this piece, you'll be able to understand how to interpret the discourse that is coming our way, whether it is in Indian politics or anywhere else in the world, by the way, right? So please go ahead.
Right, sir. So the next chapter is the art of discourse. The essential nature of Socrates' art lay in the fact that he did not appear to want to instruct people. On the contrary, he gave the impression of one desiring to learn from those he spoke with. So, instead of lecturing like a traditional schoolmaster, he discussed. Obviously, he would not have become a famous philosopher had he confined himself purely to listening to others. Nor would he have been sentenced to death, but he just asked questions, especially to begin a conversation as if he knew nothing. In the course of the discussion, he would generally get his opponents to recognize the weakness of their arguments, and, forced into a corner, they would finally be obliged to realize what was right and what was wrong. Socrates, whose mother was a midwife, used to say that his art was like the art of the midwife. She does not herself give birth to the child, but she is there to help during its delivery. Similarly, Socrates saw his task as helping people to give birth to the correct insight, since real understanding must come from within. It cannot be imparted by someone else, and only the understanding that comes from within can lead to the true insight. Let me put it more precisely. The ability to give birth is a natural characteristic. In the same way, everybody can grasp philosophical truths if they just use their innate reason. Using their innate reason means teaching, reaching, reaching down inside yourself and using what is there. By playing ignorant, Socrates forced the people he met to use their common sense. Socrates could feign ignorance or pretend to be dumber than he was. We call this Socratic irony. This enabled him to continually expose the weaknesses in people's thinking. He was not averse to doing this in the middle of the city square. If you met Socrates, you thus might end up being made a fool of publicly. So, it is not surprising that as time went by, people found him increasingly exacerbating, especially people who had status in the community. Quote unquote, Athens is like a sluggish horse. He is reputed to have said, quote unquote, and I am the gadfly trying to sting it into life. What do we do with gadflies, Sophie? Sir, any commentary, sir? The chapter is over.
Yeah, there are many things here. So please pay attention to, even today, there are many people that do this, right?
True, sir.
I mean, we do this sometimes when we go on panels, right? I mean, have to admit I do this quite a bit, right? I ask very basic questions, right? It's like when
Right.
people are talking about belief, blind belief, they talk about religion and they talk about a set of truths and all that. You start by asking some very basic questions, right? What is religion, right? What is a human being? Define humanism, you know, because that is how you expose the fact that your foundation is weak, you know. You can always go to the top floor and try to fight with swords, but if the building doesn't exist, then there's no fight, right? So given
Right.
that, you have to always look at the core first. How strong the core is, only then you can what do you call you can go to the higher levels, right? Most of the time, you'll find that people are not diligent enough to understand or to
Higher
question.
layers.
They try to. I mean, why should I call them they? Most people, including me, have blind spots, basically, right? And when those blind spots are not thoroughly examined, it leads to a lot of contradictions, basically. So the idea is first to test out, right? Even if you want to debate or even if you want to discuss, first you need to agree upon a set of definitions. Otherwise, it's a lot of guesswork, right? Your understanding might be different from my understanding. And in the Indian philosophical discourse also, this was there. Because anybody who was participating in the Sastrartha, as it is called, right, was required to actually first to do an analysis of what you are trying to oppose or what you are trying to question. You need to have adequate understanding of that before you ask a question, right? Unfortunately, it seems like today that requirement has been wholesale removed from the equation. Basically, people come and ask questions about other people's norms or beliefs or whatever without truly understanding where that belief system is coming from, basically, right?
Sir, I want to add one simple line, sir,
Yeah, please go ahead.
to your comments. So these people who question other people's norms and beliefs, they themselves don't state what their stand is. They just question and question and question.
Yeah, because they
And
know very well that if they even put down one line saying that this is what we stand by, they know that they'll be questioned,
true, sir.
right?
Yes.
So this
Yes.
is like it's like a plane that never lands, because the moment it lands, it cannot take off again, basically, and they are fully aware of it. You know,
Correct.
yeah,
Correct, sir.
because they'll be pinned down as soon as they stop, right? So at
Right.
some point in time, the plane is going to crash. I mean, that's a given, basically. It's just a matter of how long they can continue the uh, so-called, detached from the ground kind of flight, right? So
True, sir.
obviously Socrates was one of those people who did not budge from that position, and which is why people found him to be very frustrating, because probably he used to question everything, right? And they didn't have
Exactly.
answers. Now the thing is, it's very funny how the person asking the question puts the burden on the person who is trying to answer, right?
Correct, sir. Correct, sir.
And obviously, people of high status in Athens, for example, got their status because they were peddling some socially accepted lines, right? And
Right.
the moment you start asking the question, the status is threatened, because if you do not have an answer, now you are put in a position where there are some universal truths that are still unanswered, even in 2025, right? People inherently know that
Right.
it is true, but they cannot find a possible reason why it is true, right? But
Right,
if
sir.
your status comes from just peddling those lines, like for example, reading from a quoting from scripture or reading from a book and saying this is true, then because your status is threatened, now you find this person who is asking the questions to be extremely irritating, right? Pay
Right, sir.
attention to the fact that Socrates never abused, basically, right? He was just
Right.
asking questions. But in this day and age, the people who are pretending to be the modern day Socrates have that added special characteristic of abusing people who are trying to be decent, right? And to me, that is the line that separates a true Socratic kind of questioning from something that is agenda driven, where you put down the other person without really knowing who they are, right? Even if you know who they are,
Yes.
why would you put down somebody, right? If you truly are battling with ideas, then why would you uh, get personal, right? Or
Right. Sir.
you should be characterizing an idea based on what the idea is, not based on what your opinion of the idea is, right? And
Correct.
let people decide how good or bad that idea is, instead of labeling it as bad and trying all with all your might to prove that it is, right? Which is a desperate attempt. It shows, basically. Anyway, enough said. Let's continue, sir.
Yeah. Right, sir. Oh, I also wanted to add a couple of lines, but I forgot now, sir. Right. After the completion of reading, if
Yeah,
I
we'll
remember,
definitely, yeah.
right, sir.
Yeah. So again, that ends the chapter there. They're talking about gadflies. Gadflies are essentially these um, flies that are irritating to livestock, basically, right? And they actually suck blood out of. I mean, it's a bad comparison, but I think here the analogy stops with, if a horse is sleeping or a cow is sleeping, then the fly goes and stings it to sort of move it out of its position, basically, right? And what do you do with gadflies? You eliminate them. That's what I think the author is hinting at, basically, because it damages your livestock. Go ahead, sir, please. Next chapter.
Right, sir.
Next
I
sub-chapter,
just
rather. Yeah. Go ahead, sir.
I just remembered that question, sir. That line. When Socrates was questioning these high status people, and these people were trying to explain the accepted social lines, as you mentioned. Uh, I got a thought that maybe their language was not sufficient to explain those universal truths that they had in their minds. That's what I felt. That's
Well,
right, sir.
just like any evolution, language also evolves based on the ideas of the society, basically, right? So it is
Exactly.
possible that the language. So which one goes first, right? The thought goes first, then comes the
Yeah.
language.
Yes. Yes.
It's like math goes first in science, and then the physics and chemistry, everything else follows, basically, right?
Right.
Or even more, the world is as is. You try to look at the reality, and then you try to form a theory that potentially explains it, right? So, given
Mm.
that, yeah, maybe the language was not there, but at the same time, with whatever they had, right,
Yes. Yes.
um, it was still not good enough for Socrates. Let me put it.
Yes. Sir. If the language was not sufficient enough, Socrates will obviously find a flaw in their arguments, sir. So that way
Yeah, I
he,
mean, if you are honest about
right.
it, you can always say, I don't know, right? I think
Yeah.
he was against that mindset of people not saying, I don't know. That also is there. See, if you're honest, you'll say, I don't have language to express it, right?
Right, sir.
But they were not doing that. They were,
Mm.
I mean, they found the line that tells a lot about this whole situation is, people found him to be exasperating, especially the people of high status,
Right.
right?
Right, sir.
So that tells me that, again, there is that logic, that our argument that I put forward, which is their status comes from peddling lines that they don't fully understand. And when people
Mm.
critically analyze that, then their status goes away. They are aware of it, and hence he's a gadfly, and hence potentially whatever it is that they did to him. Yeah,
So far in our current society, I could see many gadflies
yeah,
roaming
yeah. Too
around,
many.
sir,
Whether they are true gadflies or pretending to be is a matter of
pretending.
yeah. So I think SKR also wants to read. So let's give the.
Yeah. Okay. Skegar, if you want to read.
Yeah, page number
Page number 39. A
39. A
divine
divine
voice.
voice.
Right. Please go
Okay.
ahead.
Thank you. A divine voice. It was not in order to torment his fellow beings that Socrates kept on stinging them. Something within him left him no choice. He always said that he had a divine voice inside him. Socrates protested, for example, against having any part in condemning people to death. He moreover refused to inform on his political enemies. This was eventually to cost him his life. In the year 399 before Common Era, he was accused of introducing new gods and corrupting the youth, as well as not believing in the accepted gods. With a slender majority, a jury of 500 found him guilty. He could very likely have appealed for leniency. At least he could have saved his life by agreeing to leave Athens. But had he done this, he would not have been Socrates. He valued his conscience, cons, conscience,
Conscience. Conscience.
conscience. Okay, he valued his conscience and the truth higher than life. He assured the jury that he had only acted in the best interests of the state. He was nevertheless condemned to drink hemlock. Shortly thereafter, he drank the poison in the presence of his friends and died. Why, Sophie? Why did Socrates have to die? People have been asking this question for 2400 years. However, he was not the only person in history to have seen things through to the bitter end and suffered death for the sake of their convictions. I have mentioned Jesus already, and in fact, there are several striking parallels between them. Both Jesus and Socrates were enigmatic personalities, also to their contemporaries. Neither of them wrote down their teachings, so we are forced to rely on the picture we have of them from their disciples. But we do know that they were both masters of the art of disclosure. They both spoke with a characteristic self assuredness that could fascinate as well as exasperate. And not least, they both believed that they spoke on behalf of something greater than themselves. They challenged the power of the community by criticizing all forms of injustice and corruption. And finally, their activities cost them their lives. The trials of Jesus and Socrates also exhibit clear parallels. They could certainly both have saved themselves by appealing for mercy, but they both felt they had a mission that they would have been betrayed unless they kept faith to the bitter end. And by meeting their death so bravely, they commanded an enormous following also after they had died. I do not mean to suggest that Jesus and Socrates were alike. I'm merely drawing attention to the fact that they both had a message that was inseparably linked to their personal courage. Any comments?
Yeah, no comments. I mean, that is the. I mean, it's wonderful how the author is drawing parallels. And it's also very interesting. I mean, I probably I'm going to get a lot of flag if I say this, but as soon as the word Jesus came, the viewership doubled. Not that it was high initially, but anyway, you know.
Wonderful. Then we should use that word more often.
Yeah, no, but on a serious note, it pains me to read every time the story of Socrates that he was made to drink hemlock. Right? It's unbelievably uh, sad more than anything else, right? But that's how the society was, you know. Um, and if run from a society if it is going in that direction, basically, because your turn might be next, which is what a lot of the so-called humanists and all that they claim that certain societies are going that way, you know. But in this day and age, I think it's more alarmist than anything else. It's not real, basically, because if it were real, they wouldn't have survived for this long. Okay. So that itself is the tell that we are not living in those times, basically. Right? The fact that they have platforms where they can openly criticize people is wonderful. At the same time, the abuse is what gets to me, basically. Right? If you see, even Jesus never abused. There was only one incident where he gets angry a little bit, right? But even that he sort of does because he gets frustrated, basically, more than anything else, right? And you cannot be frustrated all the time. That means you are a rebel without a cause, you know, because um, the cause should be your prime motto, not the frustration, basically, right? If you are frustrated, then you are your own enemy, you know. I mean, all the time. I mean, okay. So we have a comment here that says Socrates was a historical person, but I don't comment on Jesus. Fine, sir. I mean, essentially, they are both being questioned because we don't have direct accounts on them. We only have second-hand accounts of what they might have said. For Socrates, we have it through Plato. For Jesus Christ, we have it through his followers or people who came much later, like Luke and Matthew and things like that. Yeah, please go ahead.
A joker in Athens.
So next chapter, next sub-chapter,
Subchapter.
Joker
Yeah.
in Athens. Yeah.
A joker in Athens. Okay. Socrates, Sophie, we aren't done with him yet. We have talked about his method, but what was his philosophical project? Socrates lived at the same time as the sophists. Like them, he was more concerned with man and his place in society than with the forces of nature. As a Roman philosopher, Cicero, okay, said of
Yeah.
him a few
Cicero. That's it.
Cicero.
Yeah.
Okay. As a Roman philosopher, Cicero said of him a few hundred years later, Socrates called philosophy down from the sky and established her in the towns and introduced her into homes and forced her to investigate life, ethics, good and evil. Hmm. But Socrates differed from the sophists in one significant way. He did not consider himself to be a sophist, that is, a learned or wise person. Unlike the sophists, he did not teach for money. No, Socrates called himself a philosopher in the true sense of the word. A philosopher really means one who loves wisdom. Are you sitting comfortably, Sophie? Because it is central to the rest of this course that you fully understand the difference between a sophist and a philosopher. The sophists took money for their more or less hair splitting expoundings, and sophists of this kind have come and gone from time immemorial. I'm referring to all the schoolmasters and self opinionated know it alls who, who are satisfied with what little they know or who boast of knowing a whole lot about subjects they haven't the faintest notion of. You have probably come across a few of these sophists in your young life. A real philosopher, Sophie, is a completely different kettle of fish. The direct opposite, in fact. A philosopher knows that in reality he knows very little. That is why he constantly strives to achieve true insight. Socrates was one of these rare people. He knew that he knew nothing about life and about the world. And now comes the important part. It troubled him that he knew so little. A philosopher is therefore someone who recognizes that there is a lot he doesn't understand and is troubled by it. In that sense, he is still wiser than all those who brag about their knowledge of things they know nothing about. Wisest is she who knows she doesn't know, I said previously. Socrates himself said, "One thing only I know, and that is that I know nothing." Remember this statement because it is an admission that is rare even among philosophers. Moreover, it can be so dangerous to say it in public that it can cost you your life. The most subversive people are those who ask questions. Giving answers is not really as threatening. Any one question can be more explosive than 1,000 answers. You remember the story of the emperor's new clothes? The emperor was actually stark naked, but none of his subjects dared say so. Suddenly a child burst out. But he isn't but he's got nothing on. Oh, that was a courageous child, Sophie. Like Socrates, who dared tell people how little we humans know. The similarity between children and philosophers is something we have already talked about. To be precise, mankind is faced with a number of difficult questions that we have no satisfactory answers to. So now, two possibilities present themselves. We can either fool ourselves and the rest of the world by pretending that we know all there is to know, or we can shut our eyes to the central issues once and for all and abandon all progress. In this sense, humanity is divided. People are, generally speaking, either dead certain or totally indifferent. Both types are crawling around deep down in the rabbit's fur. It is like dividing a deck of cards into two piles, Sophie. You lay the black you lay the black cards in one pile and the red in the other. But from time to time, a joker turns up that is neither heart nor club, neither diamond nor spade. Socrates was this joker in Athens. He was neither certain nor indifferent. All he knew was that he knew nothing and it troubled him. So he became a popular philosopher, someone who doesn't give up but tirelessly pursues his quest for truth. An Athenian is said to have asked the oracle oracle at Delphi.
Yeah, Delphi is correct. That's
Delphi.
in US it is pronounced Delphi, but Delphi is the correct
Okay.
European pronunciation.
Okay. Who the wisest man in Athens was? The oracle answered that Socrates of all mortals was the wisest. When Socrates heard this, he was astounded, to put it mildly. He must have laughed, Sophie. He went straight to the person in the city whom he and everyone else thought was excessively wise. But when he turned out, but when it turned out that this person was unable to give Socrates satisfactory answers to his questions, Socrates realized that the oracle had been right. Socrates felt that it was necessary to establish a solid foundation for our knowledge. He believed that this foundation lay in man's reason. With his unshakable faith in human reason, he was decidedly a rationalist.
Yep.
Shall we move to the next subchapter or?
Yeah, I mean, look at the build up to that definition of who a rationalist is, right?
Mm.
As a rationalist, are you willing to admit that you don't know anything like Socrates did? That is my question always. Otherwise, you are irrational, all right? Because now you are using what little you know to ask questions that you think are very clever questions, while about subjects you have absolutely no clue about, basically. Okay, so you can always
Not
say, I
even
don't
the
know anything.
faintest idea, not
Yeah,
even the faintest idea of what those subjects are, sir.
correct. Now,
Faintest
2500
idea.
years ago, when we didn't have this scientific body of work, you can absolutely, you could have asked the question, right? Because people who were saying things did not know anything, right? But in this day and age, where science has made so much progress, you cannot go into a scientific discussion, for example, right? Or any sort of academic discussion, or even any subject based discussion, whether it is law or whatever it is, right? And pretend that you don't know anything and ask questions to experts who already know and are practicing it, right? You cannot go to a medical doctor and say, why are you administering Tylenol for fever, basically, right? The reasons are there. There is already enough evidence, objective evidence, to prove that something works, basically, right? And you cannot say, hey, educate me, right? Because people, A, don't have the time, B, they do not care, right? And again, the people who are into this kind of practice, they are neither the black cards nor the red cards, okay? Because they have work to do, lives to save, okay? and they are not of high status necessarily. These are people, regular people walking around in the society, right? You would not know somebody like an emergency doctor if you did not actually go talk to that person, right? And you can't just engage with, oh, I do not know, tell me, right? It's up to you to find out. 2500 years ago, yes, question everything, question whatever it is would have been a method, right? But now you can't bring that 2500 years ahead and then ask. So there is such a thing in this day and age called stupid question, right? I can't go and ask an electrical engineer, hey, teach something about circuit, like what is a circuit, right? There are books that deal with it. There's print material which did not exist back in the day. So go read, basically, right? Uh, so it's a different conversation in this day and age, is all I'm saying, right? But if you do not know anything, and if you admit that you are a rationalist, and if you do not know anything, your first order of business, if you're truly a seeker of knowledge, is to go and find out about the subject before you start asking questions.
Mm.
Anyway, so I think maybe we'll read one more chapter and then close the next one,
Okay.
basically, right?
Yeah. Okay. Next subchapter. The right insight leads to the right action. As I have mentioned earlier, Socrates claimed that he was guided by a divine inner voice and that this conscience told him what was right. He who knows what God is will do good, he said. By this, he meant that the right insight leads to the right action, and only he who does right can be a virtuous man. When we do wrong, it is because we don't know any better. That is why it is so important to go on learning. Socrates was concerned with finding clear and universally valid definitions of right and wrong. Unlike the sophists, he believed that the ability to distinguish between right and wrong lies in people's reason and not in society. You may perhaps think that this last part is a bit too obscure, Sophie. Let me put it like this. Socrates thought that no one could possibly be happy if they acted against their better judgment. And he who knows how to achieve happiness will do so. Therefore, he who knows what is right will do right. Because why would anybody choose to be unhappy? What do you think, Sophie? Can you live a happy life if you continually do things you know deep down are wrong? There are lots of people who lie and cheat and speak ill of others. Are they aware that these things are not right or fair, if you prefer? Do you think these people are happy? Socrates didn't. Okay. This is all from the letters, right? So now the story. Okay. When Sophie had read the letter, she quickly put it in the cookie tin and crawled out into the garden. She wanted to go indoors before her mother got back with the shopping in order to avoid any questions about where she had been. And she had promised to do the dishes. She had just filled the sink with water, and when her mother came staggering in with two huge shopping bags. Perhaps that was why her mother said, "You are rather preoccupied these days, Sophie." Sophie didn't know why she said it. The words just stumbled out of her mouth. So was Socrates. And her mother is like, "Socrates?" Her mother stared at her wide eyed. It was just so sad that he had to die as a result. Sophie went on thoughtfully. "My goodness, Sophie, I don't know what I am to do," Annar, her mother. Neither did Socrates. All he knew was that he knew nothing, and yet he was the cleverest person in Athens. Her mother was speechless. Finally, she said, "Is this something you have learned at school?" Sophie shook her head energetically. "We don't learn anything there. The difference between school teachers and philosophers is that school teachers think they know a lot of stuff that they try to force down our throats. Philosophers try to figure things out together with the pupils." Now we are back to white rabbits again. You know something? I demand to know who your boyfriend really is. Otherwise, I'll begin to think he is a bit disturbed. Sophie turned her back on the dishes and pointed at her mother with a dish mop. It's not him who's disturbed, but he likes to disturb others, to shake them out of their rut. That's enough of that. I think he sounds a bit too impertinent. Impertinent. Sophie turned back to the dishes. He's neither impertinent nor pertinent, said Sophie. But he's trying to reach real wisdom. That's the great difference between a real joker and all the other cards in the deck. Her mom is like, "Did you say joker?" Sophie nodded. Have you ever thought about the fact that there are a lot of hearts and diamonds in a pack of cards and a lot of spades and clubs, but there's only one joker? Good grief. How you talk back, Sophie? And how you ask? Her mother had put all the groceries away. Now she took the newspaper and went into the living room. Sophie thought she closed the door more loudly than usual. Sophie finished doing the dishes and went upstairs to her room. She had put the red silk scarf on the top shelf of the closet with the Lego blocks. She took it down and examined it carefully. Hilda, that's
Yeah.
the
So
subject.
that is that.
Sophie had completed her dishes and her mom went to read the newspaper, sir. That's that.
Yeah, exactly.
కథ కంచికి మనం ఇంటికి.
Mythical character by Jostein. Yeah, they're all. The entire story is an introduction to Western philosophy through the eyes of this 14-year-old girl, basically, sir. Very wonderfully written, critically acclaimed. This book. We should know who the boyfriend is. Well, I don't know if you'll find out, but maybe we will. Right? I'm least bothered about the boyfriend. I'm more worried about Socrates.
Could it be Sophie's
Correct,
mother
sir.
who's dropping all these letters?
Unlikely.
Okay.
Unlikely. Because, I mean, if you have direct access to, it could be her dad. That's my guess, but who knows, right? It could be
That
one of his
was
friends that. So I haven't read the book, so I don't know. Honestly, whoever it is, to me, it's less relevant than what the questions are and what the subject is about the Western philosophy and how it evolved, basically, right? Or an introduction. I'm sure there are many others who were contemporaneous to Socrates and all that who had other ideas. It was like what do you call? At least the equivalent period in history or in Earth's evolution to that particular era in Greece was this period called the Cambrian period, right? Where suddenly there was an explosion of life forms and various kinds of animals and different kinds of species. You will see this like exponential increase in the number of species on Earth during the Cambrian period. Similarly, they say that you see this explosion of ideas in ancient Athens at that point in time, right? Similarly, there was a lot of thought process in Indian philosophy as well, right? During the time of the Buddhist and the Sanatana debates and all that, basically, you know. So that was a very interesting time to be around, I guess. Anyway, I'll stop. Go ahead, sir.
sir, uh, as these kinds of debates started in the so-called Greece and Athens, I think in India, all such kinds of discussions are finished and put into a summary, sir. That's what my guess is.
Hmm.
And
Somebody has to draw a
also,
timeline to see how it matches up.
recent archaeological finds are saying so, sir,
Okay.
because I think most people are not too updated to these scientific and archaeological discoveries. But yeah, I think in the future, probably a reasonable timeline will come into existence about uh, our Indian ancient scriptures
Right.
about when So far, what we have been seeing is the timelines that we read in our books is most probably when they were compiled rather than when they were actually written or actually uh, found out by the drashtas. So it is
Basically, you
very
are saying that
difficult.
there is no, because there is no written account. It is when they were written that is dated to, not when it actually
Exactly.
happened.
They were just compilations, but actually
Yeah.
written, yeah. Actually, the original
Yeah,
discoveries were made long back, much
yeah.
before.
Let me see if there is an equivalent book where there is some kind of a timeline for the Indian side. We'll get to it. Okay, Socrates has
Okay.
మనకి
continuous
famous
disciples like Adi Shankara, but
philosopher అంటే ఎవరు?
sorry, yes, go ahead, please.
మనకి famous philosopher అంటే ఎవరు?
So all the 6 Shaddarsanas we have, right? So starting
Correct,
with
but
Kapila,
all these
Sakya.
darshanas are extracts of the Vedas, Upanishads
No,
that
no,
we have, right?
they are not extracts. They are philosophies that were built on the basic assumptions that the Vedas also laid down, basically. Because the Vedas, they put down things at a sutra level, basically. But you can take
True,
the
sir.
sutra and then to explain what you see, you can come up with models that are completely different, basically.
Correct, but these philosophers, they didn't have those the foundation texts, right? For them,
There were some accepted norms, and some people were questioning them, some people were expounding based on those norms, basically. So you'll have to see what the foundational principles were that some of these natural philosophers were taking for granted, right? Yeah, but there was no equivalent of a Veda, probably. Yes, you're right. Yeah,
I presume not even now, sir.
I mean, they don't need it. See, here is the deal, right? So it depends on how you want to go about understanding the world around you. You know, you can do like a random free walk, or you can actually do it in a more structured manner, basically. Right.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, that's the thing. Because ultimately,
We can.
see, the idea is to get to the truth. So how you go about it is totally uh, what kind of style you use is up to you, basically. You know, and the
Understood.
idea, yeah, the idea, of
Kind
course,
of
is to
like
explain as much as,
what Bruce Lee says.
yeah. I mean, even in the scientific method, there are many schools of thought, right? You look, even in quantum mechanics, there are many models. Even in classical mechanics, there are many things, right? You start taking certain variables into account, everything breaks down, and then you have to reconstruct everything. It's the same thing. I mean, what is it that you are explaining based on what is the framework that you laid on, basically, right? So here, the Shaddasanas take the Vedas as the framework, the base core, basically, and then they try to build upon it. Now, if you don't subscribe to it, it's up to you. There's no force, or there's no like coercion. Right? Continuous disciples, there are no continuous disciples, but the method has been carried forward. Okay, you can't call them disciples. They just subscribe to that, because disciples means there is a, like the Indian version of it, there is a lineage, right? So and so Sisha is so and so's student is so and so, like that. But beyond a certain point, the Socratic method got diffused, basically, right? And even today it exists. Even today, I have seen people in the Western Hemisphere talk about the Socratic method. Okay, so it's there even now, basically. We're essentially going to the first principles. That's what they say. Even Chanakya accounts does have contemporary accounts, yes. So, yeah,
ఫిలాసఫీలో డిఫరెన్సెస్ తో కూడా we were more tolerant ఏమో కదా as a
not necessarily.
society.
Not necessarily.
మరి
It is
ఇంత
the, so you will find out that with the advent of the church is when things started going sideways.
ఓహో ఓకే ఓకే
Yeah.
Correct.
So until then, the philosophers were sort of, you know, There were extreme situations that developed every once in a while where you have somebody who's questioning everything and is a nuisance according to the society, right? But at the same time, with the entire thing got canned or put a lid on when the scripture came into picture, basically. So in that sense, yes, our scriptures are a lot more tolerant than the scriptures that were developed in the Middle East. That I'll give to you.
Also, as a
basically.
society, maybe we were more tolerant ఏమో అంటున్నాను. When a something new comes up or someone proposes something.
But that is because the scripture itself is tolerant, not
Mm.
as a society, right? Yes, you can always say that there are some hardcore philosophies that the society rejected, right? But which comes first, the tolerance of the society or the scripture that is tolerant? I do not know. You
Like,
know?
do we also have a history of like killing someone because he proposed something new which just I didn't like? Or
I do not know. I'm sure it's there. We just have to find out.
Oh.
Again, because India, see, if you look at Greece, right, it's a very small area.
Mm.
And Athens, within it, Athens is like even smaller, basically. And if that is the place where the entire philosophy was founded, then you can keep track of it. But in India, it's such a diverse place. So to say that there was nothing that was discriminatory, or to say that everything was discriminatory, is very difficult to say because it's a very large landmass, right?
Right,
I
sir.
mean, if you really look at some of the bhakti texts, there are some hardcore statements in there, basically, you know.
Mm.
Yeah. So whether they were executed upon or not is a different story altogether, which is what society, that's where society comes into picture. There's something written in a book, right? Somebody wrote it, and that is the rule book that is being administered within the land. Now, to say that every one of the items that is written in the book is implemented 100% is a matter of perspective, because we do not know, right?
Correct, sir.
It's the same thing as a
Because
constitution. Yeah.
yeah,
Go ahead, sir.
because sir, there are too many belief systems and also cultural differences, and also uh, geography wise also there is variations in cultures and traditions. So it is not uh, how to say uniform everywhere, sir. I
Yeah.
think, but there is a shared cultural unity amongst among all the geographical regions in the subcontinent, but they had their own perspective of things when it comes, like you just mentioned, sir. In Vedas, it is the mantras are more like how to say mm, more like shrunken formulae, right, sir?
So I do not
So
know.
you have to deduct
Yeah. So
your own perspective out of it.
see, here is the deal, right? I do not know the what do you call it?
That is what
The
I'm guessing,
ritualistic
sir.
side of it,
ఆహా!
right?
కాదు. నా క్వెషన్ ఏంటంటే ఇప్పుడు ఈవెన్ అద్వైతం ఆర్ ద్వైతం ఇవి మనకి బ్రహ్మసూత్రాల్లోంచే వచ్చినియా? బేస్
See,
అయితే ఇట్ ఈస్ టేకెన్ ఫ్రమ్ ద సేమ్ ఫ్రేమ్‌వర్క్, రైట్?
the bottom line is this, right? These are two different philosophical frameworks that evolved independently. Okay, so it is very natural to find differences. Now, maybe there is some intersectionality and commonality because ultimately it came from the human mind, right? But so I'll give you an example where people were killed because they lost a debate.
Hmm.
Okay, Astavakra's father. His name is Karod, basically. So the person who he debates with is called Vandi. He used to be in the Janaka's, I mean, whatever, one of the Janakas, one of the kings in Mithila, right? His court. And his rule was, if you debate with me and if you lose the debate, you have to go drown yourself in the river. Okay? So that's how he dies, Astavakra's father. So Astavakra takes about to defeat this guy, but not necessarily kill him and stop this tradition of what do you call killing people because they'll
Drowning.
lose a debate.
Right.
Yeah. So now
Sir, I
to
will
say
add.
that and then you take this and then apply it to the entire timeline or the time period for the entire Indian subcontinent, I think is a little bit, I don't know, may not have been the case.
Sir, I will add one point that here, because what we have read in our so-called history books until now, after after the independence of our country, are uh, being found erroneous lately because of the new archaeological discoveries, sir. So when you said the philosophies of India and the Western philosophy, they were uh, uh, they came into existence independently. I would also like to add, they came into existence at different timelines, sir, because Indian philosophy came. I don't want to say actually the word philosophy in the Indian context, but I'm forced to use that word. So the Indian philosophy came way back in time, sir. If I have to show, I have some
No, but
data
this is not a reading on history, is it?
from ISRO, sir. I have
Yeah,
some
no, it doesn't
data from
matter.
ISRO.
For me, it's of
I can
very
show you.
little interest because what came
All right,
first is not what is important. What survives the
Yes.
test of science is what is important to me,
True, sir. True.
right? Because ultimately, you might have the most ancient philosophy in the world, but if it doesn't help you in this day and age, it's definitely good to put it down. It's like the what do you call the watermelon model of the atom, basically. Definitely, it was very novel, or like a BlackBerry phone that first came out, right? It's very, yes, it was a breakthrough at that point in time. But how long did it survive before it became extinct, right? And how relevant is it in this day and age? And unfortunately, that's how uh, reality works, basically, right? Is it useful for you now? That is the question, and
Useful how,
I think,
sir?
useful to lead
Useful
your
how?
life, useful for life betterment, right? Society's betterment,
Life
life betterment,
life betterment spiritually, or life
doesn't
betterment
matter. Life as a
materialistically?
whole, life as a whole, society as a whole, basically, right?
Right, sir. Right.
So that is the question, you know.
Mm.
So it's not about who got there first. There's no competition,
Yeah, absolutely.
There is a
There's no
wide
competition
variety
at
of
all.
toolkit. Yeah, there are wide varieties of tools available to you as a human being to adopt in your life and make it better, right?
Of course, sir. Of course.
Yeah. And the point is, I don't care what label you put on a particular concept. What I want to find out is what is it first, right? So we are just taking a journey into the Western philosophy, right? By reading this book. Now, how it compares with Indian philosophy is almost a different stream altogether, right?
All right.
If we are able to understand the Western philosophy for how it is presented the way it is, always, that is the Purva always, right? You have to understand a framework in its terminology, how it is presented by the experts in that field.
Right, sir.
Right. So first we
Right.
have to understand, and then you come back to compare and then contrast and then uh, see. Now you can use comparative narratives in order to understand that sometimes, right? But
Right.
to the
Right.
extent that it is to further your understanding of how it is presented, it is valid, you know.
Mm.
But to
Mm.
take it and then start uh, evaluating who copied from whom, these kinds of things are probably of least importance to me, or I think, right? Because I want to understand what they were trying to say. You know, they're also human beings. It seemed like a fairly cultured society. You know, until they killed people like Socrates. Now, you know, it comes to question how tolerant they were and things like that. But
So was
nevertheless, yeah, nevertheless, there was some kind of exchange of ideas,
mm.
right? I mean, the
Right, sir.
the classical way it is portrayed in Athens is that, you know, people used to go to the market, they used to eat whatever it is, and they used to gather in the evening, right? In some kind of an
Right, sir.
open sort of, there used to be a drama, for example, right? What
Rachabanda.
in India we refer to, yeah, what in India we call as Natya Sastra or whatever, like an amphitheater, right? So in the
Right, sir.
amphitheater, various ideas were proposed, you know, various plays were played, and then people came with their families and all that. And then after that, there was a very lively debate as to what is right, what is wrong. Then they used to vote. There was democracy.
Right, sir.
So this is the classical model of the Western, the idealistic Greek philosophical framework, right? The reality.
Mm.
So first we
Right,
have
sir.
to understand that, right? How it evolved, and then we can
Mm.
go back and say, oh, how was it here, right?
Right, sir.
And then we can start comparing. Okay, I mean, of course, I know Greece is nowhere to be found. India is on the research in India. So can say that, you know, X outlasted, but there is a diffusion of the Western philosophical thought across the entire Western hemisphere. That's what we need to sort of keep in mind.
Right, sir. Right. Right. Got your
Yeah,
point.
yeah, yeah. But no, this is a good topic to have. It's just that for this reading, I don't know. I mean, this is a very large topic. That's why I'm sort of putting some stakes in the ground, saying, you know, we need to curtail ourselves to stay on this subject, basically. Because once you bring Indian philosophy in, it's a different. It goes out of. I mean, now we are looking at a multi-hour situation.
Correct. Correct, sir.
Yeah, because each is its own ocean, basically. The
Sir,
last question, and then we'll
those,
close for today. Does
all right,
Advaita
sir.
work in today's life? I don't know, sir. What do you think? Even in their mythology books, they have philosophy. Well, um, that's what the beauty of philosophy is. It pervades everything. You know, the undercurrent
No,
of,
sir. I want to answer this, sir. Just as you said, uh, first understand what the idea is, what you just said, sir, about the Western philosophy. Without knowing, we cannot question or we cannot criticize or belittle whatever it
yeah,
is.
yeah,
So, if whether Advaita works in today's life or not, I think it is an individual's uh, responsibility to pursue. That's what I used a responsibility word, but I don't think
yeah.
it is the right
Basically,
word.
what you're saying is you need to first understand what it is, and then you can figure out whether it works or not.
Exactly, sir. Rather than asking others' ideas and opinions,
Yeah. No,
at
you can
least,
always ask an opinion. It's just that
yeah,
does it work? Does it not work? First, you need to understand: will a car run? Will a car
what
not run? Right? You need to
what
understand what a
Advaita
car
is,
is
right,
first.
sir?
Uh,
Yes, should understand what Advaita is in the very first place.
yeah,
That's what I. Uh, that's not. That's what all I was saying, sir. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. No problem, sir.
please continue, sir.
Okay, if you watch a triangle which is based on philosophy, almost like Karma Siddhanta. Okay, sir. All right. So, think we can move towards closing this session, unless you have any other
Yes, sir.
questions related to
Absolutely.
Socrates,
I would like to
Athens.
answer to Jayasudhi Mari as well.
Yes, sir.
Does Advaita work
Yes,
in
sir.
today's life? Yes. Yes, it does work. My simple
Oh,
answer.
wonderful, wonderful, sir.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, sir. The lawyer Garu has given the verdict. He became the judge. So take it and then
Correct.
take it for the judgment has been given. All right. So viewers, thank you very much for watch the stream and whoever is going to watch it in the future. We appreciate it and
So
please like and
one word,
subscribe.
sir.
Yeah,
Great,
please.
great discussion today, sir. Thank you for this opportunity, sir.
No problem. Anytime. Right. And thanks for participating and asking questions. That's what the idea is. And if you like the content, please like and
Likewise.
subscribe. Thank you.